Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Miguel Pelerano. I will have the pleasure of co-chairing this event. I'm saying co-chairing, but my co-chair probably didn't find the building yet. So for the time being, it's going to be chairing. And then when he arrives, we'll be co-chairing. We have a whole group of people this afternoon, 6 different speakers that will talk about the point of this session, that is biodiversity, freshwater ecosystems, and water scarcity. So basically, we will be dealing, not everything, everyone, but we will be dealing with issues like the legal issues associated with freshwater ecosystems and water security conventions. Of course, Wetlands Convention is one of the well-known conventions worldwide, the Ramsar Convention. Human rights in terms of access to water as well, and biodiversity. I would say that is biodiversity, and hopefully some of the speakers will talk also about the issue of ecosystem services related to freshwater ecosystems. We have, as I said, 6 different speakers, and because there is no place for everybody here, what I'm proposing to do, and the speakers gently accepted already, is that we will have 3 of them first, then we will go for a round of questions or short comments from the floor, and then we will go with other 3 and we'll do exactly the same. So we have 2 hours in front of us, and I think that this will be the best way to accommodate and also take advantage of this opportunity. Each of the speakers will have 10 minutes. When they are close to the 10 minutes, I will advise them to wrap up and close, because otherwise we won't be fair with those speaking at the end of the session. First, I would like to invite the first 3, as they are here in the program. Carl Bruch from the Environmental Law Institute, Washington, D.C. Max Campos, please. Max Campos from the Organization of American States. And Alejandro Isa, the director of the IUCN Environmental Law Center in Bonn. And we will hear them exactly in the same order.
Oh, okay. Yes.
It's okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So Carl, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. I advise you when you will have to start wrapping up.
Thank you very much. Is there? Okay. Yeah.
Should be working.
Thank you. I'm going to be speaking on water security and environmental peace building. This builds on a series of research undertaken by the Environmental Law Institute, UNEP, University of Tokyo, and McGill University, and I'm pleased to share the most recent, the 6th book in the series on governance, natural resources, and post-conflict peace building. I'm going to first introduce 2 terms for those who work more in the water sector than in the water security sector. So water security is the capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantities of acceptable drinking water for 3 general purposes: for livelihoods, well-being, and development, for protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and for preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. So that's water security. Environmental peace building is a new field. It's the process of governing natural resources and the environment in ways that help lay a foundation for a sustainable peace. It includes efforts to prevent, mitigate, resolve, and recover from violent conflict. So that's the conflict life cycle. And that's important to note. It's not just, these books are on post-conflict. Environmental peace building goes across the conflict life cycle. And it includes efforts related to renewable resources, including water, non-renewable resources, and ecosystems and their services. This is a graphic that UNEP has developed that shows the conflict life cycle, starting with the causes of conflict and conflict prevention, going to conflict escalation and the conduct of conflict, the resolution of conflict through peace agreements and the recovery from it. And it highlights the different aspects of the environmental dimensions. Environment can be a cause, it can help finance armed conflict, not so much water, but any sort of commodity, diamonds, timber, bananas, coca, damaged by conflict, and that's often the case with water. It can be part of the peace process, and then it can be important for building peace afterwards. And I'm going to walk through the conflict life cycle and look at water security in each of these stages. So starting with water in the onset of conflict. And a lot of people have heard about water wars. And back in 1985, Secretary General Boutros Boutros-Ghali said, the next war in the Middle East will be fought over water, not politics. We've had a few wars since then. And Syria, arguably, there was a water dimension to it. But Jordan and Lebanon went through the same water scarcity, and they didn't have a civil war. I mean, they had civil wars. Lebanon had one earlier, but it's hard to say that climate change or water caused the Syrian conflict if other countries had the same problems and did not see war. And that's, I'm going to jump right to the punchline here. Institutions, laws, and practice are crucial in determining whether water scarcity or climate change leads to conflict. This is something that the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report made clear. So you still see a lot of localized disputes over water, violent disputes. These generally don't escalate. But the big picture is kind of scary. And with climate change, it's looking to get scarier. Still, we see through Aaron Wolf and others that countries are much more likely to cooperate around water than they are to fight. Turning now to what happens to water and water security during conflict. In many cases, water and water resource and water infrastructure are intentionally targeted during armed conflict. So this includes detonation of dams, destruction of canals and irrigation, poisoning of wells. You see this a lot with ethnic conflicts. And you saw it in the Balkans, you saw it in South Sudan, you see it elsewhere. And you also see a lot of indirect impacts. Sometimes this is associated with the sorts of weapons. So the effects of the bombing of Pančevo and Novi Sad in Serbia and Montenegro caused pollution that seeped into the Danube. You see it with refugee movements in camps. People seeking refuge in places. One of the largest cities in Sudan is essentially a refugee camp in the Darfur area. And there is not enough water to support that. And they've been there for years, and they've started to kind of settle in. And there's a real question about what's going to happen to that city when the groundwater that they depend on goes away. And then you see a lot of effects of conflict on water security associated with neglect, the inability to invest or the lack of knowledge. When ISIS took the Mosul Dam, one of the biggest problems there was not, there was a fear that ISIS might detonate the dam and cause deaths, but the problem was they weren't maintaining the dam. The dam has problems, and they weren't doing the necessary maintenance. And so now the UN is going in, they're trying to do triage on this dam that had suffered for more than a year because it didn't have the necessary maintenance. Increasingly, we see efforts by the International Criminal Court and others to investigate these violations and to prosecute them. And the question is, what's the law that you're prosecuting under? For the indictment of Omar Bashir, it was genocide. And it was the poisoning of wells and destruction of water and other resources as a tool of genocide. So you're kind of bootstrapping. But this is, I'll come back to that point in a moment. So shifting now to the end of conflict, the use of water and water security interests in the peace agreements. In our research, we found that Of the countries that have suffered major armed conflict since 1990, so the end of the Cold War, major armed conflict defined as more than 1,000 battle deaths. 11 peace agreements, 11 different peace agreements have addressed water. They look at the reintegration of ex-combatants, making sure that the ex-combatants have water. Basic services, infrastructure, navigation, resettlement, livelihoods, cooperation, and governance. The peace agreements don't effectively govern post-conflict settings, but they provide incentives. They provide kind of initial ground rules, and they often start processes that are then either carried forward or neglected, which generates grievances in the post-conflict process. After conflict is where I think there's the most interesting areas of investigation, and we have a lot to say here. I'm not going to say it all in the time that we have, but one of the things is that so you can address what happened before conflict, the causes of conflict, the grievances, or the damage caused during conflict, and that's important. But in many cases, water and water security are really important regardless of the cause, that you can build confidence in the peace process if you can deliver water and sanitation. It just helps to show a return to normalcy, or a new normalcy that people never had. It's important, though, to do this in a conflict-sensitive way. And this to me is one of the most interesting things in talking to the environmental side of this dialogue, because people in the environmental side, they often feel like they can't do wrong. You know, we're here to help the environment, we're here to help people, and we're delivering water. Well, if you are also kind of listening to the government about where you should deliver water, often that is to the sections that are favorable to the government. And there is an implicit or sometimes explicit punishment of the other communities. And so the actual delivery of water services can generate conflicts if you're not careful about how you do it, where you do it. The legal reforms that happen. This is a great chance to rethink your laws, your institutions, your practices, 30 countries after major armed conflict have included water in their constitutions. I'm going to conclude with 4 key actions. We've been told, let's think about things that we can take away from this Congress. First is the importance of building adaptive capacity to govern water resources across the conflict life cycle, not just after. And yes, this is important generally, but it is so much more important when it comes to conflict, because as we noted at the beginning, whether countries, fragile states, slide into conflict depends on the institutions and governance. And so it becomes very important to build that capacity. Second is linking land reform with water reform. Often you have land reform processes without the necessary water rights. In arid and semi-arid countries, you wind up with a lot of people getting land and not being able to have a livelihood. And then that creates new problems down the road. Third is conflict-sensitive approaches to water security. And the fourth is recognizing and embracing other bodies of law. International criminal law applies here, international humanitarian law, international human rights law, and if you look more broadly at international water law, you have international investment law, international trade law, international economic law, all these areas. And we need to really use those tools, because on the water security side, it's not just about the environment, but you can advance a lot of environmental objectives using these other bodies of law. And with that, obrigado.
Thanks very much, Carl, not only for the content of your presentation, that was extremely interesting for me, but also for your excellent time management. Thank you very much. I just would like to take 1 minute to introduce Mamadou Diallo. She's mon ami Mamadou, is the co-chair of this session. I don't know if you want to say anything at this point. Merci. Our second speaker is Max Campos from the Organization of American States. Max, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the organizers, IUCN and Government of Brazil, and many others that contribute for this conference. I'm going to talk a little bit also on water security. If you don't mind, I can do it in Spanish. So I can repeat more or less everything that Carl says just in Spanish for you to review.
My only concern is that
I will do it in English.
We don't have a translation from Spanish to the other languages.
Oh, come on.
So you can speak Portuguese or French.
I can
if you
speak
want a Latin language,
Portuñol. Portuñol will be fine? All right. Okay, anyhow.
We'll try.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Still 10 minutes.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. What I will do is I will come back a little bit from what Carl said. I think that we have already the definitions in place and some of the applications of the water security into legislation and many others. What I would like to do is try to come back a little bit of what we need to really build this concept of water security and from where we are coming and how successful we have been in applying other definitions back in the 50s, 60s, till reaching the water security. And that's important for us to value, because the worst that could happen is that we build something, legislation in particular, that would affect people, depending on where you are, developing countries, without taking into account many other needs that they have. And I think that what the Sustainable Development Goals tell us, that water go across the 17 of them, for reducing poverty, for food productivity, and so on. So building water security is one element of many others that should be taken in an integral form. The first thing that I would like to stress a little bit for our friends from other areas other than the Americas, on the hemisphere, because this is where OAS has more than 50 years working on. So some of the examples I see that could be very much useful for several parts of the world too. And the first thing that we have to understand is that during the first 10 years of this century, we have several crises that affect us together. We have a financial crisis, we have an energy crisis, we have a food crisis, we have a climate crisis, and so many crises. And all happened in simultaneous. There was no way that was one time, the other one time. So all of them were affecting in some way water resources in many of the spheres that we understand. So it has an impact also on the concepts that we like to build for the future. And these are some of the examples that we live in during the past 50 years, excessive consumption and so on. But these the presentation is going to be available for all of you, I suppose. So you could go through the details. Normally I put 100 slides. I just go only through 3 or some of them, okay? So in the specific of water resources for the Americas, there are very specific things that we should to understand. One thing is that the exponential increase in pollution, contamination of water, that's the fact. There is something that is undeniable. This is something that we live in all the countries, developed or developing. You see the Flint case in the United States has been so tremendous, a big impact even for the front for president. There's been a lot of arguments about that. The decrease in financial investment for maintenance or for creating new hydraulic possibilities for bringing water to places that are needed for sanitation, for hydropower, for transportation. The Panama Canal is new regulations for having more larger ships, and so all these are water. All these are productivity in some way. And also the changes in the supply side based on climate variability and climate change is what you just mentioned. There is no way, there is a fact, there is something that is undeniable. And of course the growing demand. Latin America in particular is one of the places in the world that the urbanization is growing so fast, and the demand for water is going to be one of the major elements, especially for energy for the future. So these are some of the facts. But let's come back to the 60s or the 50s and see what were the definitions that we have in place back when we started with this agenda 50 years ago. The first thing that we had is that we imagined water only for infrastructure, for creating the dams, the irrigation camps, and so on. And this is why we have the water for development, especially for infrastructure, for potable, hydroelectricity, irrigation, transportation, all of this. But in the 80s and 90s, we start introducing the environmental factor, the ecosystems, the value of that they provide us for having the endurance of all this infrastructure. But also we recognize back in the 80s and 90s that the water was finite. When I studied in school in first grade, I have a book that said that water is an infinite resource. But back in the 80s, 90s, we realized that there is not such an infinite resource. We have to put a limit in what we use in that. And then we start recognizing the value of ecosystems in that regard. Then in the 90s and 2000s, we start talking about integrated water resources management, development, ecosystem, but the people. Then we figured out that there is people around water, which is also very important in the case that we want to implement water security and so on. And then we have the concept of water governance in the last years, which for me is the more fundamental step that we as human beings have made in a sense of understanding water better, especially seeing through these elements, and I will mention a little bit about that. And then now we have the concept of water security that, as Carl was well mentioning, implies many things, conflict, human rights. But I would like to take just a quick moment to tell you, for me, three important elements. One is the element of climate services, and this is something that probably is missing a lot. I'm coming from a background of earth science and meteorology, so I'm a kind of weather guy. So I always crazy to demonstrate that water is climate dependent. So without understanding the climate, we have no water, and that's a fact. That's something that we have to understand. So if we promote legislation in some way without understanding from where the water is coming from, I think that we are going to be in trouble with this population that could be affected in some way. The other issue is the water governance and, of course, the integrated water resources management. For me, these are the three main elements. I don't think that this could work. Oh, but this works nicely, you see? This is an hour by hour, month by month demonstration on how the weather and climate is built. And you can see, for example, for our colleagues from Africa, I don't know, because of the lights, this could be very difficult, but you are going to have all this presentation. That, for example, why the desert of the Sahara exists. Because there is no weather or climate that happens and puts some water into that. And this is how climate is so influential in the fact that water needs to be in some way managed, okay? So the climate services, which is a concept that WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, have been engaged in. Remember that the WMO is the UN water leader. So that's why the UN has been taking in some way this approach, in a sense that climate is so fundamental, climate and weather are so fundamental for the water management. And this is one way that we could demonstrate that. So climate services are basically information, knowledge, transferring of all technology, and so on. So run a little bit. The fact of climate change, undeniable. The IPCC Fifth Assessment Report, that you could say, established, for example, that water availability is the main source impacted by climate change, in particular in the Americas. And I lived here. I'm sorry that it's in Spanish, but I just plug it in for you to read in some place later on. That there are various specifics on the report, the fifth report, about water availability and its impact in the Amazonas, in the Plata, the glacier meltings in North America, and also in South America, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Ecuador, and so on. And there are many, many other factors. For Alexandra and my friend, Alejandro and my friends who are more in the ecosystem, there are specific impacts on the ecosystems, very well mentioned and very well precise, and also what can we say about extreme events and the Caribbean islands and Central America and southern part of Mexico, northern part of South America. They're very specific. And all this leads us to the big maps that we have regarding scarcity and many other factors. So these are the knowledge that we have when we go to a concept of security, what we really want to secure. If we are going to have places in which we are not going to have water. So we have to secure in some way the possibility to these places to have access to water. And this could be partnership, this could be agreements, this could be a transboundary agreements, and many others. And well, we have the concept very established and pretty well around the planet on integrated water resources management. And I believe that all countries have made a great effort, and international organizations have recognized IUCN, Global Water Partnership, UNEP, and many other OAS and so on, who has been really put a lot of effort in that the countries has this integrated water resources management into their planning agenda for their development. That's a great effort, but having integrated water resources management is like having a beautiful Mercedes-Benz and have no road if we have no governance, because there is no way that IWRN could move without governance. So you all understand what is governance, but let's see through their elements, and basically what we have in the Americas. And this is something that plus or minus is what we have. We still have very weak institutions. Institutions are still very weak in Latin America and the Americas in general. We have obsolete or fragmented legislation. And this is a big challenge for this group to really to cope with this. We also have this, what I mentioned at the beginning, these limited investments or new financial mechanisms. Remember that for many of the countries of the Americas in particular, for some of them, the capacity of the possibility to get funds from IDB, from World Bank, reaches a roof already. There is a limit, and so there is no possibility for them to go through. And also the articulation of the participation, which is for me fundamental. The participation of civil society, of the academic world, the youth. The youth is fundamental to be part of the decisions that we are taking right now over here. The private sector, and of course the government. But also the need for transparent management with information and accountability. Water is a big business. It is a big business. So I have to wrap up now. So why OAS is so important? Well, because all of what Carl mentioned, we are an organization. It's a political organization. We discuss not only the policies, but also we are looking for maintaining the peace and democracy in the regions, especially in a region like America, where 60% is transboundary, and the amount of agreements that we have are very limited, and the rest is for you to study. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Max. I'm sorry that we couldn't make the translation from Spanish.
No. That's all right. I hope that you understood my English, don't you? I'm getting better.
I just wonder how fast are you able to speak in Spanish if you are this fast in English?
I can do it faster. I can do it faster in Spanish.
Now we will hear from Alejandro Isa. Alejandro, as I said before, is the director of the IUCN Environmental Law Center in Bonn, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Miguel. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me from here? I'm going to speak about the IUCN contribution to the promotion of what we spoke about already here, the rule of law on the area of freshwater ecosystems. And I'm going to take exactly the point that my two colleagues going to start from that point of governance, the issues relating to governance. And if we understand that effective governance is based on coherent policies, laws, institutions, regulations, and all the compliance mechanisms that derive from the state administration. At the national level, and as far as freshwater resources are concerned, weak governance is probably one of the most critical challenges for freshwater ecosystems. Because incoherent policies, incoherent laws, ungrounded legal decisions, overlapping institutions can hinder, can compromise, jeopardize any effort aiming at effective management and conservation of freshwater ecosystems. At a transboundary level also, the main challenge is probably also an issue of governance, which is the absence in many areas, in many basins, of cooperative arrangements in at least 60% of all the shared basins around the world. Aware of all these challenges, IUCN designed and implemented over many years several initiatives to create enabling frameworks for effective water resources governance around the world, contributed to the drafting of an important convention, to the implementation of that convention, and this is the Convention of Wetlands of International Importance, or the Ramsar Convention. IUCN has been crucial also in the implementation of that convention, performing not only bureau duties. You probably know that the Secretariat of the Ramsar Convention is located in the headquarters of IUCN in Switzerland, but also supported the development of policy instruments under the convention and hosting several of the meeting of the parties and the different agencies or bureau agencies within the convention secretariat. But in 2000, IUCN published the so-called Water and Nature Vision Framework for Action, in which stated that in order to achieve a sustainable society, a fundamental new paradigm is needed for the use the development and the conservation of water resources that implements an integrated management using an ecosystem approach. Taking into account this new paradigm and started a conscious need to implement also the Millennium Development Goals at that time, IUCN developed a big initiative which was called the Water and Nature Initiative, the WANI initiative. The goal of this initiative was precisely to mainstream an ecosystems approach into policies, into planning, into basin management. Demonstration and wise use of water and wetlands were one of the two main strategic objectives of these initiatives. It was implemented in 5 different continents, in 12 river basins around the world, and contributed enormously to enhancing the implementation of the rule of law. Key components of this initiative's success were the adoption and the implementation of practical tools, some of them you probably know, that contributed to the reform of the water governance rule, helping in the process of management of transboundary waters, share, facilitating the negotiation of water agreements, negotiate, valuing ecosystem services, value, promoting